So welcome everybody to the Speechcraft Practical Primer. And this evening, Susan Carroll-Clark will be our presenter. She is an experienced Toastmasters with both the in-person and last time with the digital Speechcraft, and that's what she's going to be sharing, those lessons learned and practical tips today on how we can coordinate any upcoming digital Speechcraft better. So if you don't want to be recorded, turn off your video, but to stay engaged, we would encourage you to turn on your video. With that, Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you all for showing up tonight. I'm happy to see that we have a number of veterans of that very first Speechcraft here tonight, about half our people. So at the end, just to set out a few parameters, I am going to allow some time for questions and discussion about what I'm talking about today. And I do have a presentation. It's primarily so I can demo some things that are on the Speechcraft portal, which is, I think, if I'd known a little bit ahead of time what that would look like and how to navigate around it, it would have made my life a little easier. But that's getting ahead of myself. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly here. And most of this will not actually be slides, but a part of it will be. So hopefully you can see that now. Excellent. So just to get things started, this is me. Hi, I'm Susan Carroll-Clark. I've been a Distinguished Toastmaster since 2009. I have earned my Distinguished Toastmaster Award 3 times. I'm working on my first Pathways DTM. I have a fair bit of experience in district leadership, having been a division director and an area director twice. I was a division governor, actually, which tells you how long ago that was. And I was also a Pathways guide. But more germane to what we're talking about tonight, I was also a person who conducted the old Speechcraft program twice. The one with the booklet and the handouts. And for those of you who have joined in recent years, you may have seen that. The new program, the digital program, which is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, is fairly new, as in introduced within a little over a year ago, I believe. So that's me. I've got a fair bit of experience with the program. And one of the things I really am going to hopefully highlight a bit tonight is how it differs and how it really is the same. So just to give you a little bit of an agenda before I sort of go away from the slides, and I will stop sharing at that point and then go back when I need them again. So really the roadmap tonight is, what is Speechcraft? Who might consider the program? And the bulk of this is, how is it going to work? And this is my real life example where I'm going to share my own experiences running the program with quite a few people who are on this webinar tonight. And I'm sure they may have experiences to contribute themselves. And I know some of them are planning on doing this again. So hopefully this is some good experience for everybody, whether you've never run it before, you're considering running it, you just want to know what it is, you want to know how it has changed since the old version, things like that. So I'm going to stop my share for the moment as soon as I get my monitor to behave here. Actually, let me do that. It doesn't want me to do that at the moment. Oh, well, just give me a second. Well, maybe I won't worry about that. I don't want to fiddle too much around with controls. So let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about Speechcraft. First of all, where did it come from? Speechcraft has a fairly long history in Toastmasters. It's been a program for many years. It's been there since I've been a Toastmaster, which is about 16 years, as I said. And the history of it, it formally was the only thing that a club could do aside from selling entertainment booklets, like dining club booklets, to raise money for the club. And it still remains a venue that clubs can use to raise money for the club if they decide to conduct it outside for instance, a supporting organization, community organization, that kind of thing. But it also has another purpose, which is to raise the profile of Toastmasters and to give people more or less a crash course in the fundamentals that we cover in Toastmasters when those of us who are Toastmasters join a club. As I said, in the old world, and presumably someday again in the new world, this is conducted in person. It used to involve booklets and workbooks and things like that, but the basic format was sessions in which educational speeches are given and information was given to deliver to the people, the speech crafters, as we call them now, who were taking the course to get them the fundamentals of what they need to know about giving speeches. And it follows a fairly similar progression to those of us who work in now Pathways. Used to be the old CC manual, with an icebreaker speech and then focusing on the parts of speech, for instance, organizing a speech, researching, body language, gestures, vocal variety, all of those basics that we know and love. These days, the system has a learning management system, a curriculum that is built on the same system as Pathways. And in fact, the portal is called Basecamp. So if you are familiar with Pathways, particularly if you are a Basecamp manager and have seen that interface, it's going to look somewhat familiar to you, which I found out was a bit of an advantage. It's not identical though. I will cover that in a bit. So who might consider doing a Speechcraft? I'm going to focus mostly on clubs wishing to gain members, to use it as a way to bring in members, but it could also be used to help build a new club. You might also use it to do outreach with a corporate sponsor, with the community, or clubs wishing to raise funds. So how does this all work? I know some of you are familiar with this, but this is the practical approach. So how does it work these days if, say, you've made the decision that you're interested in running a Speechcraft? A club, a sponsoring club, or a sponsoring person will make the decision to present the program and to purchase the Speechcraft package. Essentially, you go to the Toastmasters International online shop and find Speechcraft, and it's a $50 package. And for what that gets you is 5 seats. And what that gives you is 1 coordinator access and 5 Speechcrafter accesses. If you want more Speechcrafters in your session, you purchase another package. That also gives you some options as far as being coordinators, which I'll talk about in a bit. The club makes the decision at that point, or the sponsor, of how much to charge for the program. So a lot of this depends on whether you're doing it as a fundraiser or you're doing it as a way to bring in new members. You can make the decision to charge, for instance, an equivalent amount to, say, 6 months dues or a year's dues. It's capped at a year's dues, but you can make that decision if you decide, for instance, that what you would like to do is offer your Speechcrafters membership in a club when they finish the program. That's an option. Lots of other options, and it depends on the purposes that you're conducting Speechcraft. Once you've made those basic decisions, you have to have a coordinator, and that was me. So the coordinator is the only person who can get the credit for presenting the program towards a DTM. You can have 2 coordinators coordinating together if you have 2 packages. And what that ends up looking like is each coordinator ends up having the responsibility for the administration of a chunk of the speech crafters. So for instance, if you had 8 people in your Speechcraft program, you could have 2 coordinators, and probably makes sense to have each of them have 4 speech crafters assigned to them. That does make a difference because there's a one-to-many sort of relationship between the individual coordinator and the speech crafters that are assigned to them, and there are administrative duties associated with that. Toastmasters does not really recommend having more than 8 participants in a Speechcraft session for reasons that are going to become apparent. It has to do with timing and length. The question always comes up, can I get credit for my DTM by being an assistant to the coordinator? The answer to that is, unfortunately, no. Only the coordinator can get the credit for the DTM. However, there are a lot of ways for other people who participate in the program to get credit for various pathways aspects. For instance, serving as a Speechcraft guide, which is kind of the Speechcraft version of mentor, or presenting one of the educational speeches, or doing other projects and pathways that have to do with the aspects of running Speechcraft. And it's entirely possible to get speaking credit or project credit in pathways for those other roles. So there are a number of pathways projects, as I said, that really would work very, very well with this. For instance, an HPL project. You could do an HPL project with pathways, and somebody else could be your coordinator, and you could do all of the administrative side, background side, the coordinating, the scheduling. There's a bunch of things you could do, for instance. So once you have your Speechcraft package, what happens is a link gets sent by Toastmasters to whoever purchased the package. Now, it's not required that that person becomes the coordinator. That person would then, if you have a different coordinator, that person, in this case, it was Ken, he sent me the link to the person who was going to coordinate to actually follow the link and to get myself associated as the coordinator of the Speechcraft. And that kicks off the whole process of configuring this for your Speechcraft sessions. You're going to, when you get that access, you're going to, at that point, get access to Speechcrafter Basecamp. And it has its own portal. The first thing I would ask people to do is, when you get that access, bookmark that access, because you're not going to be able to find it on the Toastmasters International webpage very easily. It's there. I went digging, I did find it, but it's a separate login. It's separate from the Basecamp that you use for your regular Toastmasters activities. You do use your usual Toastmasters login and password. It's speechcraft.toastmasters.org. Easy to remember. So I'm going to spend a little time showing you what the interface actually looks like. So the first thing you'll get is a landing page. This landing page is there for you to configure. This is after it's been configured. This is after the point in which I have gone in and set up the date and time of the Speechcraft. There will be an interface to do that. There will be an interface to put in the location. There will be, my information would be there as the coordinator, and the sponsoring club is there. Not necessarily the club you're doing this for. Sometimes the club you're doing this for. In this case, I was from a different club, so I had to associate it with a coordinating club that I belong to. You can assign, if all of a sudden part the way through this, you find out that, oh my gosh, work got terrible, I need to assign a new person as coordinator. There is the ability to do that and to hand off to another coordinator. You have slots these are all full because we had a full slate there, for you to put in your attendees as they sign up. You get their email address and their name, and what happens when you enter them in there, they get sent a link once they have hopefully paid their fees and things, and that's when you get the go-ahead to do this. They get a link to confirm, and that unlocks the access to their own curriculum. So that's a key step. And once they've done that, they show up on your list as registered. Before that, they're pending. So that's where you would sign up all of your people. So once you go in, to actually go to My Speechcraft Learning, you hit this big blue button. And as the coordinator, that goes to your interface, which looks like, just a minute, this. Speechcraft Basecamp looks like this. Looks like Basecamp a fair bit here. You will be familiar with some of the functions if you've seen Basecamp. This is where the path gets a little confusing. There's this introduction, start here. And yeah, you want to start there, because what will happen at that point is you'll get an introduction menu that will get you oriented to Speechcraft. It will walk you through the basic introduction to the program, how you organize your session, who you're looking for with volunteers. So get you thinking about, I'm going to need speakers, I'm going to need people to take the GE role, I'm going to need table topics, all of those people, and that'll help you to start plan. It'll talk about marketing if you haven't already done this yet. The Speechcraft package comes with some basic guides and some flyers and things that you can use to promote. And it'll do what's next. What is next, or at least the way I did it, was to go on down to planning. If you go back to your Speechcraft Basecamp, that's the next one underneath, and it made perfect sense that I go there next. And it did. There was a lot of good information. I'm going backwards in my slides again. There was a lot of good information here. Tells you how to put together your schedule, and it gives you timelines. As a project manager, this was great. This gave me an idea of how long I needed to allow for things, to start planning, to start putting things together for my session, and final thoughts. And I thought, great, I'm ready to go. And to some extent, I was ready to go, because if you go back again to this main menu, you'll see there's all kinds of here. Session resources is right underneath. Speechcraft sessions, you'll start to, as you configure your Speechcraft, you'll see that there's session guides here for every one of your sessions. I'm like, I'm planning session 1. So I'll go over to session guide number 1, and that was wonderful. And so I got an idea of what the content was with the sessions. However, what I skipped was this learning button. And what I found under there was what I needed to succeed. And I'll go down to show you what's under there. That's my learning transcript. I thought, oh, this is just where I keep everything. It's no big deal. It's whatever. No, there was this how to get started curriculum under there. And that told me nuts and bolts, gave me all kinds of tutorials and FAQs that, had I found that earlier, it would have answered a lot of my questions. Here's what is in that how to get started link. You get a get started on Basecamp as a Speechcraft coordinator that gives you a tutorial, walks you through the interface, everything you need to know. There's also a Speechcrafter overview for coordinators, which answers the question that your Speechcrafter is going to have about, well, where do I go in my interface to do X or Y? And I was like, what? I have no idea what your interface looks like. I can see what your curriculum looks like, but I don't know where you go to mark your speech is correct and completed. Well, this would have told me. And there's a tutorial for the validation of speeches. that takes place once you get going in Speechcraft, how you validate that speech crafters have finished their speeches. That's all here. So that was my first learning. It doesn't make it very obvious that this stuff is there, but it's gold, and it answered so many of my questions. I'll go back to what's also on your portal here. I also already mentioned your Speechcraft sessions. Session resources, which is right under planning, also has another link to tutorials and such, including the Basecamp coordinator, but also all of the outlines that are going to be needed for your Speechcraft educational speech presenters to give their educational speeches. They're all here. You can download them and present them. There's also Speechcrafter Learning. This is what I found immediately. This is their portal. It's great. This is their curriculum, but it's not the only thing your Speechcrafters are going to have access to. But this is a really good orientation. It gives you, it shows you how all of the different modules in their learning curriculum are arranged. And they can navigate here right to whatever the subject for the upcoming week is and go through the learning and view all of the resources that are a part of that. And you're going to be assigning these modules as part of what you do as a Speechcraft coordinator. Finally, there's a link to validation. I'm not going to go through this because there's a really good resource in that learning materials link I showed you before that shows you exactly how to do the validation. But just the too long didn't read version of this, Speechcrafters mark their speeches complete in their version of Basecamp. And then you go to here and you mark it complete. And that's how Toastmasters International knows that Speechcrafters have completed speeches, which is important for them getting credit. There are also dashboards that will help you as the coordinator know where your Speechcrafters are in the process. And finally, there's a chat and feedback function. We didn't end up using this very much in my session, but if you decide to use it, it's a way you as the coordinator can communicate with the people in your Speechcraft session. You can give them feedback. You can even mention assigning speeches to them or assigning material to them, things like that. So that's your interface. This, just to give you an idea, is the Speechcrafter interface. I took this out of that resource that I mentioned. And as you can see, there's their learning, but there's also assessments, badges, tutorials for them, and their own dashboards for their own assessments. So lots to see here. I'll get to Pathways credit at the end, but this is always something that comes up from Speechcrafters is, okay, I want to join Toastmasters, but how much credit can I get? I'll cover this a little bit later. I want to get back to now that presumably you, the coordinator, are a pro at your interface. You've seen it, you've toured around, you've done the tutorials. Now you're going to want to actually plan your sessions. So you're going to need to recruit people to help out. You as a coordinator, as I said, are the only person who has access to all this material. So I highly recommend that, especially for your guides are the people who are mentors to your Speechcrafters. And Toastmasters recommends a one-to-one relationship between guides and Speechcrafters. And I highly recommend that. It's great. Guides, they don't have access. So providing your guides with materials is a key part, I think, of doing this role. And a great way to do that is an orientation session for your guides. I would suggest walking them, sharing screens, showing them what that online interface looks like, sharing FAQs that you downloaded with them. This can also be really helpful for your other role players, the people who are going to come on as table topics masters or as educational speech people. And educational speech people are going to want to have the outlines that Toastmasters recommends for what's covered in those educational speeches. They are absolutely going to want to have that. So providing that to them, that can be shared. You are allowed to share that material as part of the people who are doing the Speechcraft. You can't share it much further than that, but you can share that with your team. And I found that, again, having an orientation session for your guides and your team is super, super helpful. And then turning that into a weekly check meeting that you can invite role players as well if they want to come for an upcoming week to take part as well. Now, here's a pro tip for you as well that they don't necessarily tell you that will help you frame when you're thinking about planning these meetings. Except for the very first one, and even to some extent the very first one, these meetings are going to feel similar to Toastmasters meetings. You're going to start with table topics as a way to break the ice. You're going to focus on speeches and evaluations for the speech crafters, followed by some educational speeches, followed by a general evaluation. Now that's their suggested templates, and there are templates for every single one of your meetings, different sets of templates for 6, 8, and 4 session meetings. That's all there for you. You can adapt those templates. You can adapt them so they work for you and your club or your purpose. So one thing you're going to think about, speaking of number of meetings, is when you're preparing for this, how many sessions are you going to have? How long are they going to be? And number of expected participants. So if you're doing this for a club, one of your first things you're going to want to do is this going to take place during the club's regular meeting time? What this will mean is if you decide that, you're going to be devoting 4 to 8 weeks solely to this program. Now, that's not to say that there aren't opportunities for club members to take part in that meeting as Toastmasters even, table topics masters, GEs, giving educational speeches. There might be some clever ways in clubs that meet for more than an hour to have, for instance, the first hour of the meeting be Speechcraft, and then follow up with maybe a chance so your other members can continue on their educational journey in giving their regular speeches. That's really up to the club. You're going to want to determine how many sessions. I, based on my previous experiences, did 6. I would actually highly recommend doing 8 if you are doing hour-long sessions, which is what we did. I think that gives a little more time and a little more breathing space and a little more chance to attend to the materials and really give everything the time it needs. If your club meets for an hour and a half, 6 could work really, really well. 4, if you're going to do a kind of a boot camp kind of session, yep, 4 could work. It all depends on how long these things are going to take. I'm going from the experience of doing hour-long sessions. And that's where I really think that 8 or 6 weeks is really not quite enough. You're going to want to determine the session length, which I just talked about. One other thing, in the standard templates for the meetings, there is time given for your speech crafters and your guides to have a breakout session to meet individually to talk. That is going to be difficult in a 1-hour meeting. What we did to adapt to that is have our guides and our speech crafters meet outside of the actual Speechcraft session, which had some good points in that I think some of the speech crafters really liked the opportunity to spend some time with their guide. But there were some of the guides who never really connected well with their speech crafters. So kind of a mixed bag there. It's something to consider. Once you've made all of your decisions and you started to sign up people and you've got the parameters for the session, remember the splash page, you enter them there. Again, you're going to be marketing to people. Participants will sign up with the club. That all depends on how the club wants to handle that. That's not something as the coordinator you really have to deal with. You just need their information. And once they're sent the link to confirm, as I showed you, they show up as confirmed on that splash page. So key roles. Toastmasters assumes that the club members are going to staff all of the roles. So mentors, that your guides or mentors, and your role players. For a new or a rebuilding club, this might not be possible. This is actually the situation that I was in. So I recruited people from a variety of, I picked on a couple of people who are here, who were district officers. I picked on club members from One York Speakers. I picked on club members from my District 86 club. I went anywhere where I thought I might find people who might be willing to help. And this went for all of the roles. So our guides was one for my One York Speakers, one of them from GMR Toastmasters, my other clubs, a couple of district officers, and one member from the club that was trying to rebuild. So a good mix there. So the Speechcrafter Guide is a key role, and these are your short-term members, or mentors, I should say.
Yes, sorry, Susan, I want to interrupt. Your slides may not be advancing. What I'm seeing is the pathways credit.
Yeah, actually, I don't have slides for these.
Oh, okay, sorry.
If you want to take me off of sharing for right now, because I really don't need to be sharing at this point. And I can't find I don't want to look around. Oh, there it is. Let me stop share. It was at the top. I should remember that from Zoom. Back to key roles. So short-term mentors for Speechcrafters, that's your guides. They do the initial evaluations for Speechcrafter speeches. Eventually the Speechcrafters do them themselves. So the Speechcraft materials will make reference to a how to be a Speechcraft guide document. I haven't found this one yet. I've looked everywhere, but it is very similar to role to mentoring in a Toastmasters club. So if you've done that introduction to Toastmasters mentoring, or you've been a mentor in a club, you'll know what to do. Basically, it's just in a really concentrated form. So mentors attend each of the sessions and they engage in the one-on-one discussions with Speechcrafters. Guest speakers come in, present speeches on educational topics for the program. And again, you get a lot of assistance offered about the contents of these speeches in the form of outlines, but these aren't canned speeches. So each of the persons who are giving an educational speech will get the opportunity to give their own take on it. They are fairly short, I'll warn you that. They're 3 to 5 minutes and they can go really fast. So you want relatively experienced Toastmasters. You really, it's best if they're through level 1 in pathways at least, enough to be able to keep themselves to 3 to 5 minutes. Meeting role players, you have your table topics master, which is pretty much exactly what it is in a meeting. A timer, a GE, speech evaluators for the educational speeches, because we're modeling good behavior here. We're showing Speechcrafters how good evaluations happen. It's kind of assumed that the coordinator will act as the Toastmaster or the chair of the meeting, but it's not required. You could have other people chairing. You can invite other experienced Toastmasters to take that role. As I mentioned before, set up regular meetings for your guides and your other team members. It's like a regular weekly project meeting, a debrief. So you start a kickoff meeting ahead of time, And then at some point after your session, you meet with your guides, your other team members, you talk about what went well in that session, and you plan for the next session. And this will involve what speech crafters are going to be talking about. That'll be certainly assigned in your session, but they're going to want to know about that. Your guides are going to want to know about what they should be talking with their speech crafters. Put together an online schedule. This is also a really good thing. I just put a spreadsheet up in Google Docs and put together a spreadsheet with the roles for each week, educational speaker, evaluators while we're still for the educational speakers, timer, table topics, all of those, and kept that in a weekly schedule. And I had it out there. And I shared it with all of my guides and all of my team members, so everyone could go see who was assigned for what week. That was really useful. As I've mentioned a couple of times, you want to download content to give to the team members. You could put up a temporary depository for some of the FAQs and give your team access rather than emailing them the PDFs. But you want to be really careful about this because this is proprietary information. You want to make sure that's restricted, and that after the session you take it down. A few technical considerations you might want to consider. We're completely virtual right now, so be comfortable with your technology. Having a dedicated Zoom master as part of this for the session is also really, really helpful, just as in a regular meeting, to move people around if you're using breakout rooms. And that's number 2. If you're using aspects of that meeting software, such as reactions, chat, spotlighting, things like that, you review so that they'll work on your first meeting. Make sure you review your other conventions. If you rename yourselves with meeting rules, for instance, how to acknowledge other people or applaud. These are some group norms you'll want to go over during your first session. Putting yourself on mute while not speaking, things like that. We may take them for granted as we're having regular meetings, but in a speech crafting session, as people come in for their first meeting, they're not necessarily going to be familiar. And every club does it a little bit differently. Check that technology ahead of time, make sure it's all working, make sure your links are there, make sure you have a way to provide your links to your participants for your online meetings, that they're emailed that, perhaps set up meetings in a calendar program with the link to the sessions. That's a great way to do it. And again, if you're going to have your speech crafters and your guides meeting during the meeting, you're going to want to know how to use breakout rooms. So make sure that you are familiar with them. Both Zoom and Microsoft Teams have that capability, but make sure you know how to use that. If you're not using one of those two, or if you're using a limited version of anything, you might not have that capability. Make sure before you depend on it, you test it. So what you're going to do for each of your sessions is plan it out using the agenda templates, using the session guides that you're going to go into for each of the session. It'll walk you through what the focus is for each of these sessions, what curriculum you're going to be assigning to your speech crafters. So that is a key part. That's going to be a takeaway for them. It should be in the agenda. One thing you might want to think about, especially at the point in which Toastmasters are going to speech crafters are going to be introducing each other, making introductions. You're going to want to figure out how you handle that, because they're going to introduce each other. You're going to want to know who's assigned to each other. So thinking about that ahead of time and assigning your speech crafters. Eventually, they will be doing evaluations for each other. Again, assigning them who is going to be the evaluator for whom as part of your meeting. Put it on the agenda and make sure the speech crafters have that agenda so that they can take that away. They know who they're going to be introducing or evaluating next week. Make sure as you're preparing for your first session that all your speech crafters are enrolled. They've clicked on the link, they've gotten access to their learning materials, that you check that on the front page. Make sure your speech crafters have been matched with guides. There's no way to do this in the system. You have to make sure that they're matched up. A great way to do this, again, is to send out an email ahead of time to the speech crafter and the guide introducing each other so that they have each other's contact information. Make sure you have your speech crafters and role players lined up for that first session. Make sure the speakers have the instruction for what they're going to cover. Download the outlines. Decide ahead of time how you're going to communicate with speech crafters. You can use the messaging system within Basecamp. We chose not to because all of our speech crafters in the session that I conducted were all members of a company, the same company, and they were using their internal system to communicate. There's also the ability in the system to assign speech crafters their modules within Basecamp. Again, they're optional to use. You can use them if you like. If you decide to, make sure this is something you've thought about before your first meeting. One other consideration you want to think of is what you're going to do if a speech crafter has to miss a session. They're given credit and pathways based on the number of speeches they complete. But if it's an emergency and they've gone ahead and put together their speech and they're unable to give it in a session, an option might be to schedule a time to present it to their guide and get their feedback and credit. If you have a longer session, you could even do a makeup session. It's not something I would recommend, but if they've done the work, they should get credit for that work. So find a way outside of the regular meeting so that they can catch up and present that speech to their guide and get the credit that they've worked on. Make sure your meeting invites have been sent, as I said. Schedule your regular check-ins with your guides and team members. You want to, on a weekly basis, once you've got your regular meetings, confirm your roles and responsibilities. You want to show, possibly as the orientation, show the guides and team members, give them a live demo into the system so they know what it looks like. They know what you're looking at, and they have an idea of what their speech crafters are going to see. Make sure your table topics master, timer, and GE know what to expect. You want to make sure they know what a speechcraft is. That it's a little bit different than a regular meeting, although their roles are very similar. They're going to need to know why are they showing up to do table topics for this bunch of people, and how they should do table topics. For instance, your first time, it's an icebreaker type session, and you want to get as many people participating as possible. In future sessions, you might want a mix of speech crafters and other meeting role players. You might want, at some point, to make sure that in your first couple of sessions, depending on your group, that the table topics master calls on people that are experienced to go first to show the way. Your table topics master is going to also have to think about how they are going to choose people. Are they going to just look at the screen and pick people at random? Are they going to use a spinner? How are people going to do table topics online? Because there's lots of ways to do it. Your timer, you're going to want to make sure, because the actual agendas don't even really introduce the timer. You may want to make sure that they're pointed out and that they are familiar and ready to go with whatever timing mechanism that they're going to use. Your final step, once you've got all your role players, you've got your sample agenda, you're going to use this to put together your actual agenda. And that's important, to use the agenda that's appropriate for the number of sessions you have chosen. Things will be set up for you, but timing and the way it works and names and all of that, and whether you decide to have speech crafters doing the breakout sessions in the actual session or separately, those are all going to be considerations. They are editable agendas, so please edit them, make them work for you. Then you go forth, you do your first meeting, and it's really a kickoff meeting for the whole program. You're going to introduce people, you're going to spend some time getting to know each other, you're going to have some basics, intros, orientations as to what speech crafters can expect in the session. Often it's great to have a really good speaker do that session to kind of give them an inspiration to go forward with the program. Once you're done, once you've done your first meeting, the other meetings become easier and easier. You just repeat 3 to 7 times, but they're much, much more like a regular meeting. So your speech crafters are going to go right into their icebreakers at the second session. They're going to be speaking at every single meeting afterwards. If you're doing 8 sessions, your final one is going to be a kind of graduation thing where the participants, you can let them take the meeting roles. You can decide that that's a great opportunity to let them run table topics or let them be Toastmaster. And it might be fun to have a great guest speaker for that. Once you've done your first class, that's when you go back and you learn how to use that express class thing that I mentioned. And that's on that dashboard, and there's a tutorial for it in your Toastmasters Learning. And that'll walk you through how to use the system to give your speech crafters credit. I would recommend looking over the session guides and the agendas at least a couple weeks out from each meeting. Speech crafters will take over responsibility for evaluations and are also encouraged to do proper introductions after a couple of sessions. Our session, we had to limit introductions to 1 to 2 per week because of time. But you want to make sure your participants each get to introduce and be introduced at least once. One thing here, one lesson learned for me as the coordinator, if you cannot do full introductions each week, at least get the speech titles so you can introduce each of the speakers properly with their name and their speech title. One other thing, consider a mid-session check-in survey for speech crafters. This is something we did, and it worked out very well. They are encouraged to have a mid-session or a halfway through a session of their own skills, but it's also great to get some feedback from them as to how things are going. And similarly, at the end, do an exit survey for both your speech crafters and your team members. That was super valuable to me in putting together this session. Finishing up with a bang. So your very last session, what's that going to look like? You want to coordinate that with your sponsoring club. Find out what their future plans are. If it's a club membership thing and these folks have maybe paid and are going to be invited in as membership, details about the regular club meeting should be part of that final session. If not, you want to invite these folks who have just spent a lot of time building up Pathways credit to join Toastmasters and to come on out and give information about when that club is going to meet. Speech crafters, they're going to want to be aware of how much credit they're going to be getting in Pathways. And I'm now going to share that screen again. That's your Pathways credit. Let me share that. So 0 speeches, no credit. Even if they only do a single speech, they get credit for an icebreaker, and all the way up through 7 speeches. Now, this is was current as of recently. We know that level 1 has changed. So I'm going to be looking for perhaps revised guidance as to how credit will be allocated now that level 1 actually looks much more like Speechcraft in pathways. So that is something I will look out for. Again, your last meeting is another chance to have a fun guest speaker for that last meeting. Give them completion certificates. This was an adventure to find out how to do it. I've put together a handout I'm happy to share with people outside of the meeting about how to do this. Hint, if you've ever been a base camp manager and have given people their certificates for their levels, it's a very similar process. It's essentially going to their profile and their certificate. Once you've taken all the steps to mark them complete in that class interface, class credit interface, they will be given a certificate in their profile, and you can go there and get it for them, fill it out, and present it to them virtually, or hopefully at some point in real life. Even if they have to miss a speech, they get a completion certificate. As long as they did not completely drop out, you give them a completion certificate. Then at the end, everything's done. You want to make sure you're asking the participants that they've marked everything they've completed in their base camp. And then you go and submit all the completions in Express class. And then finally, you as the coordinator, there's a final checklist in your learning transcript that walks you through all the final steps you take as a coordinator. And that concludes with contacting World Headquarters, either by phone or email. The address, phone number, or in the FAQ that you'll see to get the credit for being a Speechcraft coordinator. Note, this may take a few weeks. I did the email thing. It eventually came about. Finally, just a few lessons learned for you. Get familiar with your interface. Review those tutorials, read the facts. Do that well ahead of time so you know your way around. But the key to Speechcraft is not on the online tutorials. It's in quality online sessions. Running them is not that much different than running a regular Toastmasters meeting. All of the protocols that we are familiar with apply. Be enthusiastic, engaging, be familiar with the material being covered in the educational speeches. That will set the focus for the next week. Make sure that you are familiar with what you're assigning the Speechcrafters for the next week. Watch your timing. If you are doing an hour-long session, it goes quickly. And remember that every Speechcrafter group is going to have a different dynamic. My group, the most recent group, they were highly motivated, self-directed. They all worked for the same company, and they were, relatively speaking, some of the least nervous beginner speakers I've ever come across. On the other hand, going back to my previous experience, I coordinated a Speechcraft using the older materials consisting of people for whom English was not their first language, and they were much more tentative. Having that one-on-one relationship with a guide would have been wonderful for them. We didn't have that back then. It's a wonderful thing for people who are really nervous speakers to have that mentorship experience. Be willing to watch, assess, and adjust as you go along to address the unique requirements of each group. That concludes my presentation. I am happy to take questions, comments, anything you would like to talk about, any questions you have about Speechcraft and about my experience. I see Louise with her hand up. Louise.
Yeah, like way back in the beginning, I tried to stick my hand up and I put it down, but it was when you were showing us about the part you missed and you kind of went back and you showed us, you gave us kind of an overview
Yeah.
page, and then you something about learning, and then you found out where all the useful information was.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to envision that. You pay for your package,
Yep.
get it, and you log in, and you're going to see that page you showed us.
Yep. The
And then
splash
is it
page.
just easy to miss something that was in that page? Can you just review that?
I will show you my slide again.
That'd be great, because I didn't see where you were poking for learning part. Thank you.
Let me share that slide with you again. Okay, just a minute. Did I take off my slides? Can you, let me see. I've got a green outline here. I'm just trying to see what's going on with my slide. Okay. Things just do not want to play with me at the moment. Oh, there we go. Okay, here we go. The correct thing, Speechcraft presentation. Okay. This is the full interface. I won't worry about that. You can see all my slides, but this will allow me to navigate around a lot easier. Okay, so go to my Speechcraft Learning, big blue button, that's easy to see. And when you hit that big blue button, you come into Speechcraft Basecamp. This is the introduction and the planning. Here is that learning session, or that section.
And it was the learning that took you to the other part that was the most useful first. Okay, I knew there was something there and I couldn't figure it out. Thank you.
Yeah, when you click on that, you get into this, your learning transcript.
Gotcha. So after you've done that and you read your learning transcript, then you probably go over to introduction, or is that kind of covered in these ones?
Well, as I said, it actually worked out fairly well. Introduction and planning, getting that almost, it's not really a 10,000 foot view. It's like a 5,000 foot view, overview of what you're going to be doing to learn about the program and plan for the program. That gives you puts you in the right headspace, but then to get into the nitty gritty as to how things work in your base camp here, that's where you hit that how to get started. Two things one called introduction and one called how to get started. That's what got confusing. Because getting started on Basecamp as a Speechcraft coordinator is going to give you the tools to navigate around this whole thing and tell you where things are and where you're going to find some important things that you're going to need that will help you in your planning. So I think that's a key thing. So you basically you start to get into your headspace for planning and getting introduced to the whole concept of things, and then you start to learn the technical details. And as you do that, you start to put together your team. You can look at tutorials. You can start to look at those individual meeting resources so that you can start, okay, I need to look at session 1. There's a little introductory session guide to each one of the sessions that will walk you through what to expect for each of the sessions. And they're linked up to the agendas. So you can see the agenda for 4, 6, or 8 meetings, and it will tell you what's being covered, what educational speeches you're going to be doing, all of that. Okay, I'm going to unshare again. And I see there are things in chat right now. I'm going to look some folks. Oh, okay. Ken has taken off for his session, for his training session. Are there any other questions or comments or things you're worried about or things you really want to know from someone who's been there? Louise again.
I want to make sure other people get a turn first, but I actually would like to do a Speechcraft because it's one thing I need to get for a DTM. So let's make sure everyone else got their stuff answered first. Otherwise, I'm going to hit the next question here. So just so I understand you correctly. So you go out and buy the package, like the $50 worth.
Yep.
And then for application, like I see one of my clubs is weak on numbers in
Yes.
my division, right? So if I want to strengthen their numbers, I could go to that club and say, hey, would you like to have a speechcraft that will help you draw new members?
Yeah.
And so then you can set your fees
Yeah.
to actually make it work as a membership fee for 6 months or a year within that club.
Yeah.
But you also do this speechcraft, and by
Yeah.
doing that, they can keep track of their steps within Speechcraft and credit that to Pathways if they stay
Yeah.
for.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's within a club. Now, say the club isn't interested. Say I want to do a Speechcraft. I don't have a club per se. What would I do? Gather a bunch of people together,
Yeah.
and just say, hey, would you like to get a taste of what Toastmasters is about?
Yeah.
And then
If
run
you,
the Speechcraft and get it. And then I guess I have to get a team
yeah.
that would make it work. And the team, how many people approximately?
Well, it all depends on how many speech crafters you want. Toastmasters recommends a one-to-one relationship for the guides. And again, Toastmasters doesn't recommend doing more than about 8 people. 5 for an hour-long speechcraft. We couldn't have done 8. There's no way we could have done 8. 5 was, well, those meetings were tight. So 5 is a really good number. You could do 8 if you had a longer meeting, and that also gives someone else the opportunity because you would need 2 modules for that. So they're 5 packs. You get 5 slots, and that gives 1 person credit. So technically, if you decided you wanted to be the only coordinator and you wanted to actually do 8 people, you could technically get asked a credit for doing 2 speech crafts. But probably an easier way to do it with that many people would be to have dual coordinators, and they could, you can coordinate with each other and hand off and, work with each other.
Work as a team and have 2 people get credit for toward a DTM by doing two coordinators to the Speechcraft.
Yeah, and that's the only way to do it. You can't have, if you've just got one package purchased, you can only have 1 person get the DTM credit. Yeah.
And so you say if you had bought the 1 package, you've got
5.
4. Yeah, you got 5, but you got 4 people, right?
5 people. Well, you don't count.
That's right. So that's what I'm saying. 4 other people.
Yeah. If you want to be a guide, I was not a guide. I found 5 people to be my guides. I focused on purely coordinating, which I would suggest doing that. But you could, if you wanted to, be a guide. But you have your hands full being a coordinator, trust me. You are doing a lot of stuff. So finding, again, people to be guides. And this is where having a club to support you, or at least a support structure where you can get people to help out with this. And again, this is something, even if a club doesn't want to do the membership conversion thing, this is a great way if you are a member of a club, and sure, I'd like to have some more members join my club, but maybe not necessarily make them members through Speechcraft. You could sponsor a Speechcraft and then at the end just say, oh, and by the way, Toastmasters meets, this is the club that sponsored this, or the people that sponsored this meet at this time, or if it's multiple people that you're drawing on, you could share a variety of meetings. You can do all of that, and they still get their credit regardless of what Toastmasters club they join. But that's a lot of credit. I mean, it's well into level 2. They get a lot of credit. So it's a real opportunity for them to hit the ground running in Pathways. Being somebody who's an experienced VP Ed, this is the hardest thing about being a VP Ed, is getting people to pick a path and Pathways and get going is often really difficult unless they kind of have the little shove. Well, they've already done all of these things. They should go and get credit. So, I mean, on its own, Speechcraft is its own thing and is a worthwhile credential, but Toastmasters, getting them in to continue if they really like what they've seen, I think it's an easier sell.
So I see Bruce has his hand up.
Yes.
Well.
I was just going to call on him. Bruce?
Thank you. If the coordinator, or when the coordinator is arranging for the guides for the 5 speech crafters, if you're short on guides, can one guide mentor 2 speech crafters?
Yep.
So it's allowed.
As I said, Toastmasters recommends 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Not always possible.
Yeah.
So a guide could definitely mentor 2 speech crafters.
Okay, and yeah, and they could actually do maybe personal, outside of the meeting, they could do personal Zoom sessions with both the speech crafters.
Absolutely. And for the session that we ran, that you came in and spoke a couple of times, that's exactly what we were doing. We were 1-to-1, but they were meeting outside because we honestly did not have time for breakout rooms in our 1 hour, rather intense sessions that we had. I was always impressed that what we got done, and we pretty much kept to time, but that was something that really it made sense to do outside. And if you have a 1-to-2 relationship or more, it really would make more sense to do it outside, so that everyone gets some time. All the speech crafters get a good amount of time with their guides. So, yeah. Louise.
Yeah. So in making the decision on this, like, obviously $50 is big for me. So, I mean, I want to do that, but is there a way to like read an overview or manual and learn about it before and make sure I can kind of put all my ducks in a row so that I don't lose money if I take a bad risk?
There are some FAQs online. You can always bug me. I'm happy to trade questions at any time about how it goes. There's also a District 60 Speechcraft person.
Okay.
Who might be on this call.
That's me, and I've got a little package of resources that I have put together for potential coordinators that has some of the things Susan mentioned. There's a couple of short videos and things that I think are kind of a good way to kind of get your feet wet and kind of see a bit more of what it might be like. So be fine to send you that, but also have a conversation and explore it a bit further.
Let's talk.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm thinking is I can recoup that too if I have a club that wants to host or be the sponsor or whatever the title is.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
It could be great. There may be clubs around that would like to sponsor, but there's nobody in that club that's ready or has the time or the motivation to take on the coordinator role.
Yeah, and it can be daunting. I mean, I came into this as an experienced Speechcraft coordinator, and it took me a while to get up to speed. And that's why I put together the session, is so that hi, Donna Marie. The next one doesn't have this problem. Yeah, my pain is your gain. It really wasn't too much pain. I mean, I did find things, and once I got past the sort of mental block, it was like, oh, electronic curriculum, oh my gosh, and what the heck, and realized that at the core of the program is the same. It really is focused on the meetings, the speeches that the speech crafters deliver, and they are the good old Toastmasters classics of doing, the icebreakers and your body language and organization and vocal variety and all those things. That is the core of the Speechcraft experience. And if you are fairly confident about that, and you know how to recruit people and get people to help out, you'll do fine. You will do absolutely fine.
I'm not worried about succeeding at it. It's just getting someone that, buy into it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to fork out that much money.
So
I have 2 gift certificates from Toastmaster.
Yeah. So Louise, if I can make a point, Louise, like our last club, how they did it is that they factor in the $50 to get the package as part of the fee for the speech crafters to join. So this way, the coordinator or else is not out of any money. They factor that as the price of the speech crafter, which includes joining that club. join, so that you gain the members from the speech crafters, and that factors in and the $50 to purchase the material online.
Yep. Any other questions?
I just want to say I'm really glad I came. Thank you for your presentation. And Barb, I'm glad to
good.
hear that you're working on this too. I'd like to work further with you on this to definitely learn more, and I'd definitely take it on the run. I actually know somebody else that I might be able to convince to be a co-coordinator with me.
Excellent.
Oh, Bruce too? You want to do it too, Bruce? Or are you gonna draw? Oh, Bruce.
I'm waving goodbye.
Oh,
I have to get going. So
Donna
thank
Marie,
you.
did you have something?
I just want to make sure you're ready for speed dial.
I have made the offer, especially because Donna Marie is essentially stepping in where I stepped before, for the same club as they try to rebuild. That's Ken's club, 20 Bay Pros of Pros. They are up to 6 members now, and they are going at this again. And Donna Marie is taking the step of becoming a Speechcraft coordinator, and that's why she's here. Yay!
Donna Marie, I have something to gain out of that club getting some success on it too. So if you need a volunteer to work with you,
Ooh, there you
I
go.
definitely would want the experience with Speechcraft anyway. I want a Speechcraft to get my DTM, my second DTM, but I also want to see my club succeed. I'm in C, I'm Division C, and I got a lot of weak clubs, so I could see like one of my clubs I'd like to try to reinvigorate by using a Speechcraft. But I also knew that Bay was going to do another round, and I didn't know where they were at. So if you need a person, count on me.
Could you send me your email in the chat, please?
Put it in the chat. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
That's a terrific way to orient yourself to the program,
Is
which will
to
help
take part.
you get a good sense of what the coordinator does.
That's how I learned. Back before I conducted a Speechcraft as a coordinator, I was on a team that it was actually, I think it was really early. I think I'd been a Toastmaster for maybe two and a half years at the time. And we did this, the Speechcraft for a corporate club. And at the end, they gave us stuffed tigers. It was AGF, and they have the tiger thing. We still have the tiger, but that's what showed me what the program was like, and that gave me the practical experience, and it was excellent. And if you have the ability to assist with one before you do the coordination role, I think a lot will be easier for you. So
I did one back in 2010 or 11 at Queen's University in the engineering department.
Oh yeah.
But it was book stuff, and it was like I was a participant, not a coordinator. And
oh yeah.
I did a couple with 2 different groups at Queen's University, but it was so long ago, and I'm sure it's way different. But even just the materials being electronic and stuff like that, sort of. And I do see in what I've seen so far, the interface is much like Pathways. Yes. And having been a VP of Ed and doing some of the back end stuff, the Basecamp management, that part's not foreign to me at all. That's easy. I'm not worried about that. So yeah.
I found that having been a Basecamp manager was really useful. Having seen the back end interface, even though the system that you use to give credit, just simply being familiar with moving around in that sort of atmosphere and knowing about the profile and a few things like that. That was really useful. And I realized it once I learned about the certificates, and I never would have guessed that it was exactly the same as it was in Basecamp, that you go to the person's profile, and once they've been credited with it, you could get their certificate there. Who knew?
Yeah,
I do now. I mean, that was one of the things I learned in the FAQ and that getting started thing. Those FAQs are excellent. There are really good ones that, like I said, not only is there a presentation or tutorial that walks you through what the Speechcrafters see, there's a Speechcrafter FAQ, like there are questions they might ask, as well as an FAQ just in general for coordinators about moving around and administration and all that kind of stuff. So there's some really good resources there. Just need to find them.
I Googled
you
and I
can
found
now.
quite a few videos already.
Yeah.
Like I haven't looked at them yet because I'm paying attention to you, but I
Yeah.
know where they are and my page is saved open.
Yeah.
I'll look at it later. But
The online tutorial, or sorry, I should say the online curriculum for the Speechcrafters is also really good. I have to say I'm impressed. I would say it's better than Basecamp. Obviously it's newer. I think they've learned some lessons in usability and navigability. It's nice. I love the fact that there's an overall page, splash page, that they can just go in and click on the module and get right to the module that they want. They don't have to go to their learning transcript. It's there if they want to. If they want to go in the way that we do in Basecamp, that they can do that. But there's this great interface there that is graphical that they just click on the module that they want to go see and it takes them right to it. It's really nice.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly piqued my interest. I've heard things about it before, but I just I haven't. At first, I was going to do a different route for my DTM, and then I realized I signed up for this coaching and mentoring. They're one credit. They're not two separate credits. And I realized, oh no, I want to be a sponsor, not a mentor, because I've already got my coaching credit. So if I'm going to get an DTM, I got to do either a Speechcraft or just wait till I find a club to sponsor. But why not try something new? Because I've done sponsor before. I've done coach before. I'm now doing mentor. So why not add spice to it and become a Speechcraft leader?
I really like the Speechcraft program. One of the most rewarding experiences I ever had was doing it for that group that was newcomers to Canada, English as a second language. Terribly rewarding. It was wonderful. I did that for 2 different groups actually, and with similar sort of thing. And I always tell people that on the second time I did that, that was where I met Elton Brown, who went on to bigger and better things as a district director eventually. But I knew him back when he was helping me with a Speechcraft.
Is youth leadership sort of the same? Like, is it another package of educational? Because that's the other thing you get a credit for. I'm just curious. I've
never done that one. Yeah, I think it's similar.
Yeah, youth leadership is the same, but it's for youth, which is under 18. Yeah, under 18.
Well, one of my passions is to find.
I'm just going to stop the recording.
Okay. Oh, yeah, do that.